It's sort of funny, all these people like make these videos when they like look back and they think, well, what would I change? I wish I never did this. These are the 10 things I wish I knew. And to be honest, I made a lot of mistakes and I did a lot of things in medical school that I'm like, well, I'm glad I did them because now I know X, or now I learn from that in this way. However, there are a few things that I would probably change and it would make my life a whole lot easier if I actually did them in medical school, and will probably make me a better doctor today. So let's go through those things. Even though mistakes are a good thing, if you can learn before you actually make the mistakes, then it can only be beneficial. So let's go through those things now. All right, so this first thing, this is a really good piece of advice that I sort of forget often, but it's easy to go into like this big spiral when you get into the med school space and you're studying and you're learning and you're doing this lecture and you got this exam or this test, and then you can forget about this whole thing. But this piece of advice is really, really helpful. Stop studying for your marks and start studying for your career. And I think this is useful and a really great piece of advice for a few different reasons. I guess one of the main things is that sure, you can regurgitate a piece of information that you remembered the night before or a couple of hours before your exam that you need to pass and get through medical school. And that might be super, super necessary at that time because you are sleep deprived, busy, and you are 30 lectures behind. However, if you can put it into the big picture, at some point you're actually going to need to put this into real life practice, because you'll be dealing with real life patients, with real life problems, with real life consequences from those problems. Well, they won't get managed perfectly, but if they don't get managed correctly. And I guess one of the things is, say you're sitting across from a patient and they're asking you a question about this, which may or may not be similar to the question that the exam paper is asking you. How are you actually going to tell that real person in front of you what the answer to that question is? So a good way to think about this and put it into actual perspective is, think about your knowledge of a medical condition, let's say diverticulitis, and then you can compare it to a few different people who you may interact or talk to for that medical condition. So the first person you may talk to is the patient, and you need to convert this like medical school understanding, sort of like, you know, acronyms, you know, all this like medical jargon knowledge into real life English or whatever language you're speaking to the patient in. And you can speak to them in like a real life, you know, colloquial language that they will understand. So you need to be able to not answer like you are on an exam paper, but actually speak normal everyday language to that person to help them understand diseases they have and what they're coming into hospital with, etc. The other way to think about it is, say you need to take that information that you know about that medical condition and convey it to the consultant who you're admitting that patient under. And you need to say, well, they've got X severity of this condition. They've also got A, B, and C reasons why they need to come to hospital. You need to present the patient with that medical condition to a senior colleague in order to help them understand the patient who they have not examined or not seen or not spoken to, and take your word for it that this patient has X condition and needs to come into hospital. And that's a completely different ballpark in terms of medical understanding and knowledge. And I guess when you start studying for your career, you're thinking in terms of that way, the bare bones framework for that. And I guess when you take it back to medical school, if you can sort of start to form the scaffolding for how you may encounter those situations, I think it helps with your ability to understand, remember, and actually learn these concepts. So that's a really good learning point that often gets forgotten, but is really good to come back to, especially if you are having a bit more time and you're not cramming as much and you're actually focusing on the actual content that you're learning. So yeah, a good one to start things off. Certainly a really, really good piece of advice that I often forget, but try to come back to. Let's go on to number 2. All right, so this next one is more of a practical, useful, everyday tool that you can actually take into practice as a medical student and junior doctor, and potentially a senior doctor as well. I guess it's the fact that you build up your library of resources over time. And if you start viewing yourself as almost this librarian and you need to know where to access this piece of information or that piece of information, that's going to be your most helpful savior at the end of the day. Because when you're sleep deprived, 12 hours into a 14-hour shift, you've got a patient who's deteriorating and you can't for the life of you remember a dose of medication that's actually going to be super pivotal to this patient and them getting better. And you don't have internet access for some reason, the hospital's server is down, the Wi-Fi is not working, you're in some random part of the hospital that doesn't even have service. You need to know how to access this piece of information. And the more you delegate, the easier it is going to be for you in the long run. And I guess having this idea that your phone, your resources in your bag, your, ports of call to actually access information is going to be very, very helpful. So the whole point of this thing is to build up these apps, notes, resources, bits of information that you can access, websites, whatever it is. Maybe it's like some little handbook about a particular specialty or, just a sort of survival guide that it is to these common ward calls or medications or whatever bit of information that you can access. Have an ability to have like a library of your own, whether that's in a notes app, whether it's in some sort of note-taking platform like Notion, or maybe it's a physical copy, like an actual book that you carry around with you. Whatever it is, you need to have sort of a library of resources that you can access at any point. And I made a video about this a while ago, just some basic apps that I use every day as a doctor, and essentially just delegates pieces of information that I don't expect myself to remember off the top of my head. And especially in a situation where the patient may be deteriorating, crashing, or just I don't have time to, figure it out myself, or I don't want to bet on my ability to remember a lecture slide in medical school. I just go to that piece of information, that software, that website, whatever it is, and say, well, what medication dose do I use for the patient I've got in front of me with a pretty mediocre kidney function and a lot of comorbidities who are this particular weight? That piece of software can figure it out for me. And some bits just on my notes app on my iPhone that don't need any internet to connect to, that I can access whether I'm in this dark recess of the hospital or I'm in a fully functional, server accessible, part of the hospital as well. So whatever it is, I think the patient in front of you needs the best care. And if you think to yourself, can I remember absolutely everything? Obviously not. Then what are you going to be able to do better? Well, I'm going to feel like I'm going to be better at accessing all these pieces of information. Know where to go, don't know everything. Okay? So having bits of information where it's like, well, if I wanted to learn about some medication or I had some sort of medication question, I'm going to use this app or this website. If I have some question about how to deal with fractures, then I'm going to go to this website. If I need to learn about how to do an emergency procedure like an ultrasounded guided cannula, an arterial line, a ABG or something, then I'm going to go to this website or software. So figure out where those nooks and crannies are for your knowledge, what you can remember yourself and are pretty confident with, and know what you're not confident with and say, well, anytime I have a question about ECGs, I'm just going to go to this website, like Life in the Fast Lane or something, and it has all these ECGs that I can just, look at the patterns, I can reference. It's a really, really simple guide, and that's what I'm going to use as my resource. And you need to just figure out what the best one is for you for each of these different things. So, think of yourself as a librarian, think of all the different resources that you can use. And if you build them up over time, then it's not going to come crashing down on you and you think, well, I should have done this sooner, or why didn't I remember this at this stage? So yeah, I don't know. I don't think of myself as this superhuman, intelligent person that knows all these different medical conditions and how to treat it and everything like that. I just think, well, I've been around, I'm going to use my experience and I'm going to know where to access pieces of information that I need. And that's way more reliable and safe than you can ever imagine. All right, Number 3. All right, so this last one is probably the best and most useful piece of advice for medical students wanting to actually learn and make a real difference to their impact as a doctor, and to just save themselves some, hard realities in the future. And I guess medical school, if you view it as a time to essentially, it's like you're buying a course and you're not having to pay for it yet, and you're just in like this free trial phase. For a medical student, when you're on placement at the hospital, you get unimpeded access to patients who you have no responsibility for. You have no, tasks that you actually need to do. You don't need to be at this place at this time, and you don't actually have a job. So as a medical student, sure, you have times where you have tutorials or lectures or exams, whatever. But when you're on placement at the hospital, I look at that as like my free trial for a course that I'm eventually going to purchase, which is life as a doctor. And if you can look at it like that, I want to make the most of my free trial period, and I don't want to just buy something that I'm not going to like and not going to enjoy. And I guess, sure, you've already signed up to medical school and you will eventually buy this course anyways, but I guess you can make the most of it, and it's going to be easier in the long run if you spend way more time seeing patients, doing procedures, seeing different medical conditions, knowing different signs and symptoms. And I guess there is no substitution for like seeing a particular sign in a patient, a particular medical condition that you've only read about or watched some YouTube video about. You won't remember that as much as you will remember John from Ward 3 who has COPD with end-stage lung failure, and you listen to their lungs and you think, wow, like that's what that patient sounds like, and that's what a patient with that medical condition sounds like. And you will remember seeing a fracture that you reduced and what it feels like and what it looks like. You will actually remember examining a rigid abdomen and then seeing that patient in theatre like an hour later and doing an emergency laparotomy on them and finding the cause of why they presented so sick. And I guess seeing those patients and building up that library of all those different presentations, all those different medical conditions, medications you prescribe, different procedures you perform, that is going to be your absolute holy grail for learning and experiencing and understanding stuff as a junior doctor. And I guess that's the thing. It's just like putting the reps in, and with all this stuff, it's like quantity, and then a whole bunch of quantity produces quality in the end. And sure, learning all that stuff in a lecture theatre and doing well on exams and tutorials, etc. If you don't supplement it, or if you don't validate that with actual real life people and real life patients with those medical conditions that you are studying, then I think it's probably a bit of a wasted, experience, wasted knowledge. So that's what I would strongly advise for medical students wanting to make the most out of all this stuff, is that you actually need to spend time in the hospital with real life patients, doing stuff like a history exam, investigations, medications, seeing procedures, helping out with surgeries, helping out in a resuscitation situation or a met call or a code blue, or referring a patient to this consultant or that specialty or whatever it is, talking to a family member. The more things you can do, and of course all those things are under supervision, the better you'll be with them as a doctor. And that's it. And I guess at the end of the day, it's just more reps, more time, and more experience that you can gather free as a medical student. As I said, you're on your free trial period. Then as a doctor, when you actually have to do it as a job, you're already got all these things under your belt, and you've been doing it for a while that you actually understand. And of course, it's different as a doctor, but if you can sort of substitute that a little bit as a medical student, I think that's only going to be beneficial for you. There's a few different things that I wish I did as a medical student that would absolutely make my life as a junior doctor 10 times easier and better. And I think that if you can do one of those things really well, then it's definitely going to enhance your medical school journey, but then also life as a junior doctor, and it makes it more enjoyable, and you get a bit more perspective in the long run. So there you go. Hopefully that helps. We'll see you next time. Bye.